Hi, welcome everyone. So today's video is going to be a bit different from my usual videos. So usually I do these educational videos and not that this one isn't educational, but this is something that's been in the news recently. So I'm sure you've all heard about the case of George Papadopoulos. This was the Trump advisor who was arrested and then he pleaded guilty. And last week he was sentenced. So it's been in the news and there's kind of a lot of disinformation. And I just thought let me try and do a video and just explain the legal side of it. And maybe that will sort of clear up some things. So maybe first of all, we can take a look at what this is all about. So you see the headline here. This was from December 30th, 2017, New York Times. So it basically told us that this case, the George Papadopoulos case, is how this whole Trump-Russia inquiry started. And in fact, that's probably true. And in fact, it says that this campaign aide, Papadopoulos, he had drinks and then he talked about political dirt. And, you know, that sort of in a short form is kind of what happened. And then it all kind of snowballed. And now we've got this massive Trump-Russia thing and so on. So let's kind of see how the media has been portraying it. So you can see that, for instance, there's a headline here. This was from October 2017. By the way, when these headlines came out, all the information we're going to discuss today was already known because the plea agreement and the statement of offense for George Papadopoulos had already been published. So one newspaper here said that uh, Russia offered dirt on Clinton. It turns out that wasn't true, but you know, you could see it was all kind of hyped up, and you know how dangerous Papadopoulos is, or you know he was wearing a wire and so on. None of this turned out to be true, but that's the sort of media landscape that we're looking at in terms of the kinds of headlines and the things that came out at the time. October 30th here. This was after the plea was already agreed, after he had already been convicted. So all the information that we're going to discuss today was already known. And then it says here that he tried to work with the Russian government, which that's not true either, or that he flipped. That's not true either. So got a lot of media hysteria, a lot of headlines. So what's the real deal? So let's first look at the key dates here. So the first date I've picked out sort of precedes the whole thing, really, but it's important because, for instance, on the 12th of February 2016, there was an article in Forbes magazine that Vladimir Putin had somehow gotten a hold of Hillary Clinton's 30,000 deleted emails. So we all remember this story, right? That Hillary, she had 60,000 emails on her private server at home in her basement or whatever. And when she was supposed to give them back to the State Department because they were work related, she deleted half of them and said they weren't work related. And everyone's been wondering since, well, what was in those 30,000 emails? And the fact is, we still don't know because they've never surfaced. So this was already being talked about way back when. So February 2016, I'm sure there were other articles too, but this just to illustrate that the idea that Putin, Russia, so whoever might have these emails was already out there. So this is before Papadopoulos joined the Trump campaign. Now, when did he join? This is a bit tricky. So on the 7th of March 2016, he was told kind of informally that he would be called upon to join the campaign, but this wasn't formalized yet. At the time, he was working in London for a think tank, CILP. Now, a week after that, Papadopoulos met this guy called Joseph Mifsud. He's known as the professor. So in all the court documents, you'll always see him called the professor. They don't actually name him. So he met this guy in Rome. Why was he in Rome? Well, he went to Rome as part of his job with LCILP. So this is all pre-Trump. This had to do with his old gig. And so he happened to run into this guy Mifsud in Rome. Now, a week later, the campaign actually announced that Papadopoulos was going to join the campaign, 21st of March. Then 3 days later, he again met Mifsud. This is the second meeting. This time they met in Rome. Sorry, this time they met in London. And this time Mifsud was joined by a Russian lady, and she was introduced as a niece of Putin's. It turned out she wasn't. She was just a student. We'll get back to that later. And then a week later, Papadopoulos actually joined the campaign. That means physically joined it, because remember, the whole time he was living in London, and he actually flew to the US, he flew to Washington and had this meeting on the 31st. So this is a date when there was this meeting where there's this photo of Papadopoulos sitting at this table, and Trump is there, and Jeff Sessions is there, and a bunch of other advisors are there. All right, so when did he actually join? You could say, well, informally on the 7th, formally he was announced on the 21st, and then actually joined on the 31st, somewhere around that time. That becomes important later. All right, what happened then? About a month later, the third meeting between Papadopoulos and Mifsud happened. That was in London again. So we had Rome, London, London. Third meeting in London. This is where allegedly, this is what this whole case is really about. Mifsud told Papadopoulos that there's this Clinton dirt. Not sure he said email. That's not clear anyway. But there was some sort of dirt on Hillary Clinton that the Russians had, and Papadopoulos says that he thought this was. If we just go back a slide here, he thought this related to those 30,000 emails that everyone was talking about at the time. All right, so couple of weeks later, 10th of May, Papadopoulos met Alexander Downer in London. As to how this came about, we're not clear. So Papadopoulos himself doesn't sort of know for sure. I mean, he was invited to this meeting, but he's not so sure, who was behind that or whatever. But the point is, he met this guy, Alexander Downer, Australian ambassador in London. But I say more importantly, this guy was the foreign minister of Australia for a period of 11 years from in the 1990s and in the early 2000s. So pretty, big shot guy, Alexander Downer. So when they met, apparently Papadopoulos told him, hey, I got this guy, who told me about this dirt that the Russians are, allegedly have. So he kind of gossiped about the story. So in Papadopoulos' own words, he gossiped with Downer. In fact, he says he's not sure whether he told Downer. He does say he did gossip with this guy here, next guy here, Nikos Koutsias, 26th of May. So a couple of weeks later. So Koutsias is basically the Greek. He was the Greek foreign minister at the time, and he still is. So we had kind of two foreign ministers involved here, and Papadopoulos allegedly told both of these guys that the Russians, or that he had heard that the Russians had some dirt in Hillary Clinton. All right, so then nothing happened until 22nd of July 2016, and that's when when WikiLeaks released the DNC emails. Now, very importantly here, DNC emails, not Hillary Clinton's emails. So DNC is the Democratic National Committee. Now, that might sort of have relate to Clinton in some way, but these are not Hillary Clinton's emails for sure. But what that did on the 22nd of July when they were released was that Downer sort of thought, hey, I remember this Papadopoulos guy, he was talking about something like that. So he passed along the information to the Americans. Not quite sure exactly whether it was done through the Australian government or whether he did it personally. But anyway, he passed along the information that he had met this guy Papadopoulos, that Papadopoulos had something to do with Trump, and that Papadopoulos seemed to have known something about some sort of dirt. So there was a sort of connection made perhaps between the DNC emails and that Papadopoulos might have known about this beforehand, so before they were released. And in that case, obviously Papadopoulos would have had sort of advanced knowledge, which, that sounds pretty nefarious. The problem, of course, is that at the time when Papadopoulos was allegedly told, 26th of April, about this, it really must have been the Clinton emails and not the DNC emails, because the DNC hadn't been hacked, or the hack was sort of ongoing, and a lot of the exfiltration hadn't happened at all. So probably a false alarm. But nonetheless, it was an alarm that set the whole thing going, because on the 31st of July, the FBI opened because of this Crossfire Hurricane investigation that we've all heard about. And basically, they wanted to look into whether someone associated with Trump, in this case Papadopoulos, whether he had any advanced knowledge of this DNC email release. Now, I can already tell you, if we skip ahead to the end, he didn't, and none of that was the case. This was basically a false alarm, but Papadopoulos did get into trouble, but he got into trouble because of something else, which we'll get into in a moment. So about 6 months later, January 2017, this is when he gets into trouble. The FBI interviews Papadopoulos. This is in Chicago at his mom's house. They sort of show up. No one opens the door. They ring his phone. He says he's in the shower. He sort of panics and opens up, and then he says, okay, I'll come along and I'll talk to you guys. And that was probably a pretty stupid thing to do, doing it without a lawyer. Not because, he sort of had bad things to hide or whatever, just simply because it's usually not a good idea to talk without a lawyer being there, because, you might say something that isn't quite true, but, you're not sure. There's all kinds of pitfalls there. But anyway, he did. He probably thought he could be helpful, and it turned out to be really bad for him because 6 months later, 27th of July, he was arrested. He was arrested flying in from Munich to Washington, D.C., and he landed at Dulles, and that's where he was arrested. So what were the charges that were brought against him? So there's basically three charges. They're listed as three separate charges, but as we shall see, it sort of involves five different things. So the first charge here, and these are taken straight out of the government document, the Statement of Offense, 5th of October 2017, that he made a false statement about meeting this professor Mifsud and learning about the Russian dirt before he joined the campaign. So we will break this down in a moment into much more detail, but so that's the first one. The second one is that his contacts with Mifsud, again the Professor Mifsud, were inconsequential, that he lied about that. And that thirdly, that he lied about his contacts with this Russian lady who turned out to be a student, the niece of Putin, allegedly, who wasn't. And so he lied about the timing and also about the consequentialness of their meeting. All right, so let's try and break this down. So the applicable law is this famous 18 U.S.C. 1001A. We've all heard about it because that's the one that they got Martha Stewart on, as well as General Mike Flynn. So this has sort of been in the media quite a lot. Now, sort of a long section, but I've truncated it to the bits that matter to us. So the bits that matter to us are here. Whoever knowingly and willfully makes any materially false, fictitious, or fraudulent statement or representation shall be fined, imprisoned not more than 5 years, or both. All right, so what are the elements here? Well, I've sort of highlighted them in the case of Papadopoulos. First of all, he did that knowingly, whatever he told the FBI, the lie he told the FBI, he did that knowingly and willfully. What does that mean? That basically means it was intentional. Can you tell an unintentional lie? Sure, you can say something that's not true, but you don't know it's not true. It's because perhaps someone else told you something and you're just sort of passing it on. So it looks like a lie, but it's actually basically an innocent lie or an innocent representation of something. So anyway, knowingly and willfully means he intended to lie. And the other point here is that whatever the lie is, whatever he said, must be materially false. So what's the difference between something that's false and materially false? It's basically materially false. Well, if you look at the legal background here and the cases that describe it and so on, the law describes it as something that is capable of influencing someone else to sort of go in a certain direction. So if, for instance, you told someone that you this morning you had 2 cups of coffee, but you only had 1 cup of coffee. Okay, that's not materially false because it's not really going to influence anyone else to do something or not do something. It doesn't have that capacity to influence anyone else. Whereas materially false is, if you say, well, this morning I was at home all the time, but you weren't. That might have an influence on someone else, like let's say the FBI or whoever's interviewing you, in terms of the conclusions they draw from that. So it's something that's capable of influencing someone else in terms of what they do next. Now, does it actually have to influence them? No, it doesn't. This is important. So if the FBI interviews you and you tell them a lie which is materially false, or something that is capable of influencing the FBI's decision, even if the FBI know that whatever you said is not true, it's still capable of influencing their decision. It won't, because they sort of found out beforehand that whatever you said is not true, but it doesn't matter. So it doesn't matter whether it actually influences the FBI or it doesn't. That's not the standard here. It's just that it's capable of. So Papadopoulos must have said something intentionally which was capable of influencing the FBI. Those are the 2 standards we're talking about here. So what then are the charges? Well, go back here. We had basically the 3. Let's try and break them down. So the first one, that he made a false statement, namely that he met the professor, this Mifsud guy, and learned about the Russian dirt before he joined the campaign. So we have to break this really down into 2 parts. So the first part is that he lied when he said that he met Mifsud before he joined the campaign. That's the meeting part, and the second part is that he lied when he said that he learned about the dirt before he joined the campaign. So there's the meeting part and the learning part. Those are kind of separate statements. I met him then and then, or I heard about the dirt then and then. So two different parts here.